The file begins. April 2026. The sky over Miami wept a heavy rain, and over the estates of Sean Combs, where the loudest parties once roared, the shadows of federal presence deepened. Special forces, armored vehicles, the cold metal of automatic rifles reflecting the gray morning light. This was not an arrest. This was an invasion. New warrants, new charges, sprung from the earth like weeds in a forgotten cemetery. While Combs served his sentence at Fort Dix, his open-air empire was subjected to a total inventory. Helicopters hovered over the mansions, like predatory birds searching for prey. This was not just a procedure. This was a public sentence. The industry, accustomed to his brilliance, froze. Those who yesterday shared tables and stages with him suddenly went blind and deaf. Hollywood dust, covering up the sins of others for decades, rose into the air, revealing ugly skeletons. Show business is a meat grinder of fame. And now it was grinding its once chief butcher. The charges, uttered that day, concerned not only old cases. They spoke of new evidence, of the expansion of the federal investigation, of how even partial acquittal had not saved him from the next wave. This was not a fall. This was an expulsion. Pause final. A deep breath, almost a sigh. The consequences didn't wait. They crashed down on him like a concrete slab, assets freezing not by the day, but by the hour. Bank accounts, stocks, company shares, everything that formed the foundation of his billion-dollar empire, turning to digital dust. His name, once synonymous with success and luxury, now a brand. Advertising deals ripped apart. Music catalogs, worth hundreds of millions, devalued in the eyes of investors. No one wanted to touch this legacy, tainted by scandal. This wasn't a loss of reputation. This was a digital coffin. Public opinion, like a tide, receded, leaving behind only the sand of alienation. Those who lauded him yesterday turned away today, eager to distance themselves from the shadow of the bunker Combs found himself in. His lawyers, once all-powerful, now flailing, searching for any loophole. Strategies shifting daily. Each new civil lawsuit, and their number had surpassed 70, another nail in the coffin. His sons, Justin and Christian, announced plans for a documentary series to show the family truth. A desperate attempt. Pause, a bitter testament. This wasn't a defense. It was an inventory of sins. This was an inventory of sins. But any sin has its backstory, its roots, deeply embedded in the soil. Before the digital dust began to settle, there was the concrete of Harlem, the Bronx, the place where Sean Combs, a boy from a broken home who lost his father at 3 years old, first tasted ambition. Pause. Hunger. Not for food, but for influence. He wasn't born with a silver spoon. He dug it out of the dirt. His journey began from the bottom with a job at Uptown Records, where his grip and his nose for hits quickly set him apart from the crowd. He didn't ask for permission. He took. Like a bulldozer clearing a path through the jungle of the industry, he swept aside competitors, gathered talent. This wasn't just a job, it was war. Bad Boy Records, founded by him in 1993, became his first bastion, his empire on paper, built on sound, speed, and ruthlessness. He didn't just create music, he manufactured a dream, sold a lifestyle. Every beat, every contract, every move was calculated. The goal was one: absolute domination. This was the anatomy of a rise that would later turn into, pause, the anatomy of a fall. The empire grew like a cancerous tumor, devouring everything in its path. The mid-90s. It was his zenith. The golden age. Bad Boy Records didn't just release hits. It dictated the cultural code. Gleaming chains, designer clothes, limousines, private jets. It wasn't just music. It was a manifesto of luxury, aggression, and triumph. He was at the top. His name, Diddy, became synonymous with invincibility, with impunity. Every album bearing his label went platinum. Every party, a legend. He was a king, sitting on a throne of money and influence, surrounded by loyalty, bought and earned. Pause. Or so it seemed. His success smelled of fresh printer's ink and an old fear of destitution. But in the shadow of every colossal success lie the seeds of future destruction. The higher the flight, the harder the fall. He wasn't just building a business. He was building a myth. And myths, as everyone knows, are fragile. And when they crumble, the debris of the empire flies in all directions, leaving behind only pause, a bitter testament. A bitter testament. The myth, once impenetrable, began to crack. Not with a bang, but with a whisper, then a chorus. The first civil complaints emerged from the concrete and shadows, not as a storm, but as a slow, corrosive drip. Accusations, initially dismissed as the bitter rantings of opportunists, started to accumulate. Each new filing was a shard reflecting a deeper, more disturbing pattern. They spoke of coercion, of control, of nights that tasted like ash and regret. Pause. Sexual assault, physical abuse. The language of the courts began to paint a mosaic far removed from the polished sheen of his public image. These were not mere allegations of misconduct. They were detailed anatomies of betrayal, each one a testament to a ruined destiny. The Golden Empire, built on rhythm and ambition, now found itself besieged by legal papers, each page a potential nail in a digital coffin. The silence around him, once a sign of deference, became a heavy, expectant shroud. It was the inventory of sins, slowly, meticulously compiled by those who had once moved in his orbit. The whispers hardened into shouts. The civil suits, a mere prelude, drew the attention of a greater, colder force, the federal government. Their interest was not in compensation, but in accountability. The meticulous gears of justice began to turn, grinding slowly, relentlessly. Investigators, moving with the quiet efficiency of ghosts, began to piece together a mosaic of evidence. It was an inventory of sins that went beyond civil grievances. Sources, once terrified into silence, found their voices in the sterile environment of federal interview rooms. There were ledgers, digital footprints, and most damningly, testimonies. Testimonies that spoke not just of exploitation, but of a calculated system. The grand jury, a silent arbiter, heard the evidence. They saw the patterns. They understood the scope. The charges that followed were grave. Transportation to engage in prostitution under the cold, unyielding language of the Mann Act. But there were others too, darker still, hinting at a wider enterprise. Racketeering, conspiracy, the shadow of sex trafficking. The sheer weight of the federal indictment was a public verdict, even before a verdict was rendered. It was the anatomy of a fall, meticulously documented, sealed, and prepared for public unveiling. The game had changed. The empire was not just cracking, it was under siege. The empire was not just cracking, it was under siege. But this assault was not sudden. Its shadows stretched from the past, from those years when rumors drowned in streams of cash, and inconvenient truths were sealed in envelopes marked confidential. This was an inventory of sins begun long before the federal prosecutor. For decades, when every whisper of the unacceptable was extinguished by the clink of coins, when every hint of a broken destiny was transformed into a line in a ledger. Pause. Sunken contracts, forgotten agreements, papers that were meant to ensure eternal silence, now surfaced, soaked in grime and old fear. They were merely testament to how long and systematically ghosts of the past had been bought off. Each such document, a nail in the lid of a digital coffin, constructed over decades. This was not just a series of isolated incidents. It was a system built on concrete of silence and gold of oblivion. And now, as the dam had cracked, the flood was bringing not only fresh wreckage to light, but also long-buried fragments. With every new lawsuit, with every name that surfaced, it became clear. Today's verdict was merely an echo of those that had not sounded yesterday. Now that the criminal case has shed light on the very mechanics of the fall, voices have been found by those who, for decades, were merely echoes in the halls of power. Their testimony, like drops of rain, slowly but relentlessly eroded the foundations of an empire. In civil lawsuits, where the burden of proof is lower than in criminal court, these stories became a verdict rendered by society. These were not abstract accusations. These were anatomical dissections of lives, each one a separate act of pain. Pause. Testimony from Florida, where a producer described hours of entrapment and humiliation. Pause. Stories from others whose names remained in the shadows for now, but whose evidence already formed the basis for new investigations in Los Angeles. Every word, every detail, every scar on the soul is a fragment of a shattered mirror, reflecting something far greater than individual tragedy. These are the remnants of an empire built on fear and exploitation. They did not ask for forgiveness. They demanded justice. And their voices, finally, drowned out the rustle of banknotes and the creak of closing doors. The creak of closing doors was followed by the clang of steel. On October 3rd, 2025, the gavel fell. A sentence of pause 50 months, 4 years and 2 months. It was a formal declaration of the end. Sean Combs, once a Titan, now a federal inmate. His address, Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institute, New Jersey. Not the penthouse suites, not the private jets, just concrete and bars. The empire, built on a foundation of rhythm and ruthless ambition, began its final, irreversible collapse. The public trust, once a malleable currency, evaporated. Businesses, once vibrant arteries of his financial heart, hemorrhaged. Sponsorships vanished. Partnerships dissolved. The brand, meticulously crafted over decades, became a digital grave. This was the anatomy of a fall. The music, once a soundtrack to aspiration, now played as an elegy. Even the most loyal adherents could not ignore the stench of decay. The very name Diddy, once synonymous with boundless success, became a bitter testament to an inescapable truth. Some debts are collected not in cash, but in years, in reputation, in the very soul. The gilded cage had become a concrete cell. His full sentence would see him within those walls until May 8th, 2028. What remained then? A shell. The myth shattered. The music industry, once his playground, had moved on. The once bright beacon of his influence dimmed to a flickering ember, then extinguished. This was the posthumous audit of a living man. His legacy, once projected as an unblemished monument to entrepreneurship, now stood as a stark warning. a monument to what happens when ambition devours ethics. The millions still tethered to his name were a bitter inheritance, a fortune diminished, constantly threatened by the relentless tide of civil litigation. Over 70 lawsuits, a chorus of accusers, each demanding their pound of flesh. Even after the prison gates opened, the legal battles would continue, a purgatory of paperwork and public scrutiny. He had built an empire, yes, but its foundation was revealed to be sand. The gilded facade had crumbled, revealing the concrete truth beneath. The world watched, not with pity, but with a cold understanding that even the most dazzling crowns can be forged in darkness, and that true freedom, unlike money, cannot be bought. It must be earned, and sometimes it is simply lost.